Good evening, everybody. Apologize for the little bit of the lateness here. Had an interesting day today. I'm trying to get this shared with some people. All right, so give me just a second here. Dead air, dead air. All right, we need to get some people in here because we have a very important show. And I don't know if we have any new viewers this evening or if we have any new viewers in the future, as this is going to be up on YouTube, up on Facebook, up on Twitter. Also want to let everybody know, if you're watching, that number right up. Let me see if I can do it right up. Over. No, oh, wrong way. This way. Over there in the corner. See that? That 1-833 live NBC, that is our call-in number. This actually is a live call-in show. I know that we have a habit of getting really engaged with the guests and we don't take a lot of calls. But this evening, we have independent journalist Michael Volpe, and we'll bring him up in just a second. But we have some updates for you about the Melissa Deagle case. And one of our first shows that we did before where we began to do this show on a consistent basis was concerning the Melissa Deagle case, because she was arrested back in May by the U.S. Marshals. And this gets me every time. Like, I just shared this weekend 2 or 3 articles about how Amber Alerts were issued for foster care or for foster children that were taken by their parents. And at the same time, a journalist covered 18,000 missing foster kids from the system, and there's no Amber Alerts. These kids disappear all the time. And the only time they put an Amber Alert, if it's a parent trying to protect their child, then they'll use the feds, they'll use U.S. Marshals, they'll use Amber Alerts, they'll do everything to separate those parents from their children, but they sure can't find these 18,000 missing foster kids unless they happen to, like they did in Michigan, find them in a sex trafficking ring and notice that some of those kids weren't even reported missing. Because, as we all know, it's about the incentives. And next week, we're going to have, again, Attorney Connie Reguli about the Title IV funding, the fraud that goes on with it. For you people that want to know, why would they steal kids? Well, it's like any other trafficker. There's a financial incentive. And we're combating that, guys. We have some wonderful people, Kathleen Arthur, Terry LaPointe, Connie just got back from Washington, D.C. They were talking to reps like Rep Jim Jordan. I love Rep Jim Jordan. He's out there calling people out for their corruption. And I truly believe if we get someone like him on board, if he really wakes up to the level of child trafficking that's happening through the foster care system, unless he's a fraud. And I leave that open, guys, because a lot of these politicians are frauds. They're good talkers, but when it comes down to really addressing these critical issues, they don't do anything. And the more I grow and the more I learn about how they can combat corruption as legislators, the more I realize these people aren't doing anything. I mean, all these hearings and committees and things they're having to try to impeach Trump, they could do that for DCF. There's reps that could put out an investigation and haul the head of Health and Human Services, who oversees the DCF agencies and the federal distribution of the Title IV, and have these huge hearings where they're grilled about the missing foster kids, about 70% of sex trafficked people coming out of foster care, about the lying in court, about the deprivation of civil liberties, about children dying, children being over-medicated, children being molested, or the video that came out this weekend. Unfortunately, one foster kid was wise enough to film, where this foster mom is telling this little baby, "I'm going to choke you out. You better shut up." And how often does this happen? Ooh, that got me ranting. Sorry about that. So, it's been a crazy weekend, a lot of developments, and I appreciate, whoa, hey, we went sideways. See, I'm rocking my whole table and my camera. This whole weekend, there's just been a lot of disclosure. I really want to talk about the Deagle case, though, and we're going to bring Michael on here in just a second. So back in May, I'm going to let him give you the history. Because I think there's a lot of misinformation about Miss Deagle and what's going on with her case, and Michael has been paying attention to this. Like I said before, he's an independent journalist, writes articles, a recent one about prosecutor misconduct, a celebrity prosecutor that's doing some pretty shady stuff to maintain a 100% conviction rate. Let's just hide evidence from people. His most recent book is Sandra Grazzini Rucky and the World's Last Custody Trial. So you want to check that book out. But let's bring Michael up, Ted, and talk to him about this incredible injustice going on in Arizona. Michael, thank you for joining us this evening. Did I pronounce that name right? Sandra Grazzini Rucky and the World's Last Custody Trial. Is that correct? Okay, I'm not getting no sound. Oh,
you got it now?
There we go. There he is. Did I pronounce that correct, Michael?
You did.
Okay. I'm terrible with names. Just ask Connie. It took me 2 years to get her name right. Really important episode we have tonight. So why don't you give people a little bit about who you are? I know you're an independent journalist. What got you into covering these issues about DCF and the Melissa Deagle case? What you know, maybe give people a little history.
Right. What got me into DCF was in 2013, I received a press release from a group that was trying to reform child protective services in Pennsylvania. And it just looked like an interesting story. And I guess you can call it a rabbit hole, because here I am. That led to family court corruption, guardianship, you name it. But all of this started, you can find it, I think it was September of 2013. It's WorldNet Daily. Now they call themselves WND.com. But that was the beginning of everything. And Melissa Deagle, I did a story about Arizona Department of Child Safety, which is their version of CPS. And the Deagle case, along with baby Devani, was a 2-year-old who was first placed with the head of a porn ring, and then placed with a woman who scalded her and burned 80% of her body. Those two cases, Deagle and baby Devani, are probably the two most notorious over the last 5 years in the state of Arizona with Department of Child Safety. As far as Melissa Deagle, look, they took her kids in 2014. They claimed that she has Munchausen by proxy, which is where you fake disorders, diseases. It's so rare you can say it doesn't even happen. It's unbelievably rare. I think 1 in 20,000 people actually have the real Munchausen by proxy. You mentioned a journalist was covering 18,000 missing kids. That's Jim White, Northwest Liberty News.
Yes, sir.
Myself, and Megan Fox, we've been looking into what CPS does with false allegations of Munchausen by proxy. And there is a ring, a racket to falsely accuse almost always women. Jim, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, put out on his website a call. If you've been falsely accused of Munchausen by proxy by CPS, he's already received 9 people who have claimed. That's him. Melissa is 10. Megan Fox is covering the Absu case. That's 11. Sean McMillan in California has done a couple. The most famous case, most notorious case, Justina Pelletier, her parents, they didn't call it Munchausen. That's another thing. They'll call it factitious disorder. In fact, in Melissa's case, I think they called it factitious disorder. But look, it's what Shakespeare said. A rose by any other name is still a rose. They can call it what they want. They're claiming that you're putting thoughts in the kid's head that they're not really sick. So 2014, her daughter's had a multitude of things. Everything from her esophagus is messed up, mitochondrial disorder, ADHD, autism, you name it. The kids were very sick. She wanted a second opinion. Next thing you know, CPS is called in. And there's a notorious case currently going on out of Texas, Pardo case, which you might be following as well. Similar deal. Parents complain to the hospital. Next thing you know, CPS shows up.
Right.
So that's another pattern. You want a second opinion, you want to complain, CPS shows up.
And there was actually another article I just shared, I think on Friday or Thursday. And I think it might have been NBC, but it was a pretty in-depth research on how there is this network, like you said, of doctors that specialize in diagnosing for DCF, and it was talking about there being like some 5 to 8 billion or million. It was an incredible sum of money that's going towards funding these doctors. Now they say it's incentives, they say it's to help their specialization, but what it is it's fraud. They're paying these doctors to provide them children. And here in Colorado, they recently been talking about creating a group of doctors that specialize in diagnosing neglect cases, which to me is horrifying because everything I've seen in all these cases, there's always some disconnected doctor that has a history of making these diagnoses and are paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars from DCF to be an expert witness. How is that not fraud? I don't know.
Right. It's racketeering, and what I call it's an industry. That's what I call it. You can call it what you want, but you're right. These doctors come in, and Melissa had a doctor from another state. Absu case. Cynthia had a doctor from another state. Both doctors never actually met with the woman. In both cases, they diagnosed them, in quotation marks, with either Munchausen or whatever they called it, but it's the same thing, same pattern, and that's what we think is going on. We think there's a ring of doctors that are brought in by CPS to specifically diagnose parents. For now, all we found is women with Munchausen, factitious disorder, or whatever name they come up with. So anyway, that's 2014. Kids get taken. She has no idea what's going on with her two daughters. The oldest one will be 18 in December, which she believes is the reason all of these things now are happening, because she will be old enough to sue. Yeah, it's that cynical that her daughter may be old enough to sue. We better put the mom in jail before the daughter can sue. First, I think it's February, they indict her. And the reason they brought in the marshals is because they claim she was a fugitive, even though in
Right.
2017, she moved from Arizona to Florida. So I want everybody to understand this. They are claiming that for 3 years, she committed medical child abuse by forcing these girls to have unnecessary operations, by basically making their diseases when they were perfectly fine. Which, if it's true, my question is, why did it take you to 2019 to indict her? So she gets
Yeah.
indicted. She gets indicted. And the next thing you know, there's something wrong. The state of Arizona doesn't do things right with the state of Florida. It gets dismissed. Later that day, she gets picked up by the marshals. That's May. She's extradited back to Arizona. She was in jail. This is going to break news. A week ago, Friday, they somehow raised the money. She has been released. She's under gag, though. But
Oh,
since
wow. That is news. I didn't hear that. So I don't know if anybody caught that.
Mhm.
Melissa Deagle has raised bail and been released. Praise God for that, because wasn't she having some health issues, Michael? And
Big time
the
health issue,
jail
big
was
time.
ignoring them or something to that effect?
Okay, let's make sure we're clear. She, her sister, her fiance were all saying that not only did she have health issues, but the jail was ignoring it. She had a bowel, it's too complex to explain, but basically her bowels were all jacked up. And incidentally, that bowel thing, very similar to what her daughter has. So it's very likely what her kids have are hereditary. That's how disgusting this is to call it Munchausen. They would not give her an operation. However, the jail in a statement said she's been taken care of. So the jail denies that. It's very hard to know exactly what's happening. You're right.
Okay.
That's what she says, but we should note jail says she's been taken care of. But what was interesting is the jail said the last time the doctor saw her was September 4. September 3, they got a call, not from me. I was one of the people who didn't call. From me, and the Miss, the county, whatever the Maricopa County, she's a beautiful girl, but she's also a criminal justice person. She called in. Several people called in on September 3, and I'm sure quite coincidentally, on September 4, a doctor sees Melissa. So take that for what you will. She did have the word that was used was tortuous pain in jail. But as I said, Maricopa County said everything was by the book. So they released her They raised the bail, and the bail was $100,000. So they
Wow.
somehow it was raised. She doesn't have it. Whoever came up with it was not her, because she doesn't have that kind of money. She was released. But what's happening with this case, I believe what they're doing is they're going to drag this out as much as the Constitution was allowed, because we have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. The last hearing was on September 12th. There's a document that I gave you that's up on the screen. They are calling it a complex case. That's their term. I'm not the
Yeah,
quotation marks.
let's take a look at that. And I want to back up a little in case people miss this. I want people to clearly understand. This is a mom that went through years of fighting in court for these young girls, her daughters.
Mm-hmm.
They wait until after the case is over. Her rights have been terminated. She's moved out of the state of Arizona. We're talking years later. And they arrest her for being a fugitive and criminally charge her right before her daughter is about to turn 18. And this seems to be a new tactic that we're starting to see with
Mm-hmm.
DCF. I talked to Cindy Absug recently. She was being threatened with criminal charges. I spoke with another case that Jennifer Wynn in Kansas is advocating for. They're threatening to charge her. So what they'll do is they'll exhaust it in the civil arena till they can terminate rights, because under that evidentiary standard, it's very low. Then
Mm-hmm.
after the rights are terminated and appeals are exhausted, then they criminally charge the parents, where
Mm-hmm.
it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. She could even win this criminal trial and not
Mm-hmm.
get her children back. That's how insidious this is. That's why I need people to understand how important this case is, and don't believe all these trolls out there running around uh, trying to spread lies and disinformation. So let's go over this document. We're going to post it
Mm-hmm.
um, because this is incredible. You're talking a case that's 2013, right? Was it 2013, Michael?
2014.
2014. We're in almost 2020, and she's fighting
Right.
this. Let's look
Mm-hmm.
at this document that kind of outlines what's going to
I
happen.
want to I want to point out for people, and by the way, it's not just DCF. That book I wrote, Sandra Grazzini Rucky, she's a 6-time felon. What they do in family court is when they force kids with the abusive parent, the kids run, they charge the other parent. Sandra Grazzini Rucky is a 6-time felon in the same state.
Wow.
There's another case, Culver, she was charged. There's a case out of North Carolina, Christy Newberry Brooks, her ex was molesting the child. They refused to protect the child. She ran with the child. She's a convicted criminal. That's what they'll do when the parent tries to protect the child. So it doesn't just happen with DCF, but you're right. These things supposedly happened from 2011 to 2014, and they're going to claim that all of these doctors were fooled, okay? In multiple hospitals in Florida, hospitals in Arizona. But think about it. If this was Munchausen, those kids, as soon as they were removed from her care, within 2 weeks, would have been fine, right? Because it's Munchausen. They're fine. She's putting these things in their head. Munchausen, it's even worse, where you actually make them sick. If that's
Right.
happening within a month, they're fine, right? Why does it take 5 years? Why does it take 5 years? If they should have been fine in a month, yet 5 years later. So this document claims the prosecution believes it's going to take 8 weeks to try this case. They're going to bring in 35 doctors, they say. So let me give you just a little comparison. O.J.
Yeah, right
Simpson.
there. That's page 1, if anybody wants to follow. And that's point number 2, length of trial and number of witnesses. 30 witnesses. It says it right.
Right.
That's crazy. So
Just to give you an
comparing
idea.
comparing some else.
OJ, about 9 months. John Gotti, about 3 months. That means this is slightly less complicated, according to Maricopa County, than trying the head of the Gambino crime family. All right, that's how complicated they're making this case. But it's a little more insidious than that. This document that you're looking at, what they are arguing with the judges, this is so complex. We need more time than we normally get, because you have the right, not a privilege,
To a
the
speedy
right
trial.
to a speedy trial. They want it slowed down. And by the way, same thing happened in the Rucky case. And the same thing they said. Instead of a speedy trial, we have so much evidence. took 3 days. That trial took 3 days. They had so much evidence, the whole trial took 3 days, maybe 4. But in any case, they're now arguing to slow it down. They held a hearing, I think it was September 12th or 13th. The next hearing, it's like a pretrial conference, November. There's no trial date set. There's no trial date anywhere in the future. This thing
Which
may
is
not be
what this
tried.
document says right at the top, that there's no trial date.
Right, but it also says there's so many issues. We have so much to go over. We don't even have to talk about a trial for months and months and months. We could be sitting here on September 22nd, 2020, saying, when's this trial going to happen? When's the trial going to happen? Now, I think they were doing it because they thought they'd keep her in jail. Because another thing that corrupt prosecutors like to do, hold you in jail for a really, really long time until they break you, and then suddenly you take a deal. Don't believe me? Look up Maria Butina, the so-called Russian spy. Yeah, she pled guilty after they put her in isolation for about 4 weeks, and she begged to get out of there. And they said, you want to get out of here? Plead guilty. Suddenly she pleads guilty to being a spy. That's an MO. Now she's out of jail. We'll see what happens. But they're basically saying we're going to bring in doctors from here. The one who diagnosed her without seeing her, she's going to come in. Her kids presumably will testify.
Well, and here's something that people need to understand, okay? 30 witnesses for a complex medical case when Melissa is probably forced to use a public defender or a subpar attorney. Hopefully she gets a good attorney, a national attorney, maybe Sean McMillan or somebody to come in and actually put these people on blast. But she's going to get a subpar attorney that doesn't subpoena anybody, that doesn't depose the witnesses, that doesn't do their job, so that the jury is blasted with all this medical terminology and experts that they're just confused and they convict her. If this many people think she's guilty, she must be guilty. Melissa needs adequate representation, I'm telling you. But it is good news that she's out, because then she can begin to develop a better strategy. Sorry about that, guys. Let me get that fixed. But
what you said is exactly
that's what I see
thinking.
when I read the documentation.
That's exactly what I'm thinking as well. That's what they're doing, and you're right. Right now, she has a public defender. In that document, they have released 10,000 documents to her. He's so far submitted nothing. Nothing. It's not a problem yet. It's not a problem yet. We don't have a trial scheduled, but so far he has provided zero for the defense. And incidentally, there is an affidavit from a CASA worker who's supposed to, they're all nonsense, but in theory, CASA workers are supposed to represent the best interests of the children, who said shortly after these kids were placed into foster care, they looked like they were abused. They lost like 20 pounds, maybe 10 to 20 pounds, a significant amount. You've got kids, 10 pounds, your 10-year-old loses 10 pounds. That's significant.
You freak out.
Right. And they looked like they were abused. That needs to be submitted. That CASA worker needs to get on the stand. If she is provided a fair trial, what is in that, it's an affidavit, which is signed under the penalty of perjury, which means if you lie, you've committed perjury. She needs to testify. I think it's a female. Whoever was that CASA worker needs to testify in order for her to get a fair trial. And so far, he's submitted nothing, zero. So she's received 10,000 documents. They've submitted nothing. Right now, her defense is nothing.
And then on top of that, I want people to look at this document. On point 14, under other issues, they're already using informants and spying against Mrs. Deagle. Miss Deagle, you guys don't think that they send informants when you have a public case or you're out there exposing what they're doing? Here's some proof right here. They're so threatened by this mom that's been publicly exposing them. Point 14, they had some kind of jail intel giving them information that they're concerned that the truth is going to come out, that Miss Deagle's going to give documents to the public. Outrageous.
That's exactly right. And they even use her family court case. And as a result, the judge has put a gag on her put a gag on everyone who was in the courtroom. In fact, I'm not going to get in trouble. Other people would get in trouble if I said anything that I learned after September 13th, after the gag, and I've learned nothing. So there's nothing I could say. But the gag has been placed on her, and they're claiming it's because she was releasing documents. Think about it. We have the First Amendment. Apparently not in Maricopa County. In Maricopa County, you start releasing documents and you're an enemy of the state. We need to silence you. You're absolutely right. I think the strategy here is make this as dark and non-transparent as possible, make it a star chamber, and that's the way we're going to convict her.
Yeah, I just really encourage people to, in any way possible, get involved. And I'm telling you, if you're a whistleblower, if you're under gag, we had Beth Breen from the Devani case on this show. I don't care about gag orders, okay? They'd have to come gag me and serve me personally. I'm going to talk about these cases. I'll put the documents out there. I believe in the First Amendment and protecting my sources. So, if anybody has more information to add, please send us an email or a message because we want to get this information out. That's one of the problems, Michael, with these courts is their secret nature. When every Supreme Court ruling has been towards having an open court system, that it's in the public's interest for the sake of justice to be transparent in the court systems. That's why we have the Freedom of Information Act. That's why we're supposed to be able to subpoena information from the FBI, from the CIA, from whatever, unless it's national security or they have some other reason or public interest to redact or gag the situation. But they use this gagging system on parents all over this country constantly, consistently, and it's really to hide their criminal behavior in Arizona because we're learning a lot over the past couple years of how corrupt they really are.
Let me just tell you how ridiculous it is, that case where the SWAT team showed up in Arizona that really blew all this up. A judge actually for 2 weeks gagged the Arizona Republic, put out a court order barring them for publishing an article. Now, look, it's the Arizona Republic, so they immediately brought in their team of lawyers, and that gag order was overturned. But they gagged the newspaper, and for 2 weeks, that newspaper held on to that article. Yes, it was overturned. But what if it was a blog? What if it was you? What if it was somebody independent who doesn't have a team of lawyers? That article would have never come out. And
We'd end up having to go to jail.
Right. And look, they claim it's because of the privacy of the children. And then yet at the same time, when they're trying to adopt them out, they put them up on websites. So, they claim privacy on the one end and then put these kids up on websites when they're trying to adopt them out on the other end. So it's all bogus. They hide behind privacy. And you're absolutely right. The manner in which courts violate your First Amendment rights is ridiculous. In the Rucky case, her associate, Didi Evold, has a 50-year, 50 protective order barring her from mentioning David Rucky and his 5 children by name. And that all started with a blog post.
Wow.
50. It ends in 2069. So, yeah, it happens.
And we are letting them get away with that. When I say we, I mean Americans as a people and as a country, because we can get all these kids and all these people in DC marching for all of these other events, but we literally have a system that's destroying families, trafficking children, destroying children, providing 70% of the workers for sex trafficking in America, according to the State Department.
More.
And 88%. These courts operate in complete secrecy and darkness. There's got to come down to it. And even worse, let's cross over into your most recent article. The one thing I've ran into, even in my own litigation, so we currently have a federal lawsuit against about 29 defendants. The judge is not, he's dragging our case out. You know what I mean? Giving them time to try to bury what actually happened, which it's not going to happen because we have plenty of evidence and kept lots of records. But there was a lot of misconduct. And as I sued people and sued the judge and sued the prosecutor, I began to realize that these people have no way to hold them accountable.
Mhm.
I mean, judges can be removed. It's state to state. Like in Colorado, we can recall judges. Where I was in Kansas fighting this, you can't. Once those
Mhm.
people are appointed, you can file a complaint with the bar. You can file a
Mhm.
complaint with the Supreme Court. But if they don't
Mhm.
do anything, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That
You
judge can
can.
violate your rights left and right. That prosecutor can lie. They can
Right.
withhold evidence. They can put in false evidence, and they are immune.
Mhm.
And that needs to
Right.
end. So you recently wrote an article about a celebrity prosecutor. Why don't you give
Right.
people a little background in the corruption you found in that arena of court?
Okay, so the prosecutor's name is Anna Signicolazzi, and if that name sounds familiar, she has a show on Investigation Discovery called True Conviction, which is ironic because I don't think many, if any, of her actual convictions were true convictions. So she worked for the Brooklyn DA for about 21 years, 35-0. Very proud of her record. You go put into a search engine Anna Signicolazzi 35-0, you'll be surprised with how many articles come up. She's really proud of that. Her most high profile case was the murder of Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher was murdered in 2003. Two people were convicted: Antonio Russo, who's black, which will be important as I go along, and John Giuca, Giuca, who's white. Russo was the murderer. Giuca, depending on the witness, either put him up to it, gave him the gun, or maybe was there, or also maybe took the gun afterwards. Yes, different witnesses gave different stories, and the jury still convicted, and you're going to find out why. So Giuca's convicted in 2005. It's 2019. He's still sitting in jail. The first misconduct that was found was juror misconduct. His mother, John's mother, Doreen, went undercover and became the girlfriend of one of the jurors because she heard there was juror misconduct. Got this guy on tape to say, number one, I knew John's friends, which I guess, I guess slipped his mind when he was asked during his called voir dire, slipped his mind to mention, yeah, I probably shouldn't be on this case because I know John. I'm friends of friends. And John didn't know him because he knew his friends. It's like friends of friends. The second thing, which is even more insidious, he thought John was Jewish. Juka, Jewish. He's not, but he hates Jews. And he thought it was his destiny to be on the case to get the Jew. He says this on an audio recording when they hand it to the
Wow.
judge. When they hand it to the judge accuses Doreen of being the criminal. Even though you've got this guy, juror misconduct, right on tape, doesn't matter. Thrown out. That's 2008. Let me give you some other examples. Remember Vanderbilt rape case? Brandon Vandenberg, the kids. The first trial ended in mistrial. Most people don't know this because one of the jurors failed to mention, again, it must have slipped their mind, that they too were raped. Oh, they forgot. It's a rape case. I was raped. I forgot to. Was that important? That's probably how they acted. In the Rucky case, it's even worse. The guy who became the juror foreman was asked, is there anything that might make you biased? He goes, well, what Sandra Grazzini Rucky was convicted of was her husband had custody. The kids ran, she hid the kids. So it violated a custody order. He said, well, my ex-wife kept my kids away from me the way this woman is accused. The judge, Karen Asfog, who also signed this 50-year restraining order, I'm sure quite coincidentally, said, well, you can be unbiased, so I'll keep you on the jury. Another guy said he was at a party with a friend of David Rucky, her ex-husband, and heard all about the case, but he could be unbiased. He's also on the jury. So this is the kind of stuff that happens repeatedly. But the next thing that happened was witness after witness after witness starts recanting. John's girlfriend and recanting by saying, I was pressured by Ms. Siga Nicolazzi. So his girlfriend said, the pressure was intense. They forced me, and I basically told them what they wanted to hear. This guy, Anthony DeHary, who claimed that John admitted, and everything they said was John said this, John said that, which is technically hearsay. There's no evidence. John, by the way, here's what happened. I should mention what happened. Mark Fisher was from Fairfield, Connecticut. He goes to Manhattan, starts drinking at a bar, goes to a second bar, meets a girl who he likes. So they go to a third and fourth bar, and then they wind up in John Juca's house. it's like a makeshift party. By the way, John's parents were out of town, so they did what high school and college kids do when their parents are out of town. Party breaks up at 6 in the morning, not at John's house. A few blocks down, Mark Fisher is killed by Antonio Russo. So they all claim that John said this or John said that. John claimed this, John claimed that. It was all witnesses claiming that John was saying things to them. So DeHarry said John admitted that he took the gun and he hid it here. I don't remember what his girlfriend said, but they're all recanting. But the most insidious thing is what you talked about, the withholding of evidence. There is a very important United States Supreme Court case that most people haven't heard of, despite the fact that we had a Supreme Court justice for 2 months go through nomination. We never once heard about this case. It's called Brady versus Maryland. In that case, Mr. Brady was convicted of murder, but he said, I was just there. I didn't actually pull the trigger, so you should go light, relatively light, with a murder on the sentence. And the prosecutors had the murderer admitting that's true. He was just there. I killed him, and they withheld it. 1963. Since then, if you withhold what's referred to as exculpatory evidence, which means evidence that will help the defense prove its case, it's called a Brady violation. It violates the defendant's due process, and it's grounds for overturning the conviction and giving them a new
Don't
trial.
they call it Brady material sometimes? Like I've seen cases where they've been like, this Brady material was withheld, blah, blah, blah.
Correct.
So if you hear that term, what they're saying is exculpatory evidence was withheld from the defense, because you cannot do that.
Correct.
In theory, you cannot do that. It's happening all the time. Not only are they withholding. Go ahead, I apologize.
I put this into the article. Judge Alex Kaczynski, for whom Judge Kavanaugh clerked in a dissent, said Brady violations are at an epidemic level and it's judges' responsibilities to fix it. And yet, we heard a lot about Alex Kaczynski because he was accused of sexual harassment, which has nothing to do, zero to do, with whether or not Brett Kavanaugh is or is not an appropriate Supreme Court justice. Whether or not Kavanaugh agrees with his old boss that Brady is epidemic, number one, and number two, that it's judge's responsibility to fix it is very relevant. You had zero questions about Brady, zero. Even though, and by the way, Brady versus Maryland is among the most cited cases you'll see. And you're right, they call it Brady material. In fact, there are classes and training about the proper way to disclose. She must have missed all those classes. So she has violated that at least twice, and who knows how many other times. By the way, here's one thing you should keep in mind. We have no idea how big a problem Brady is because we only know how often people get caught. If you're accused of a crime, whatever it is, theft, and I'm the prosecutor, and I have a photo of you 100 miles away at the time that theft was committed, and I burn it or put it into my pocket or put it into my drawer, and no one ever finds it, you don't know that I had it. So we have no idea how often prosecutors actually do it. Guess what? If they're doing it a lot, it's because they're not getting caught. If they get caught every time, they're probably not doing it that often. So we don't know how big a problem this is. The first piece of Brady was there was a jailhouse informant named John Avito who claimed that he overheard John Juca and his father, who's John Sr., talking. And John Sr. said, "What'd you do with the gun?" And John Jr. said, "Whatever he did." This is what he claimed. Here's what happened. Avito got convicted of some sort of a crime. Instead of doing jail time, he was given this drug treatment program. He kept violating it. And then on June 9, 2004, he just leaves the program. There's a warrant for his arrest. June 12th, he's in her office, Anna Siganakalazi, and he must have had an epiphany because he said, "Oh my God, in February of this year, I overheard this conversation and I want to do the right thing." So Anna Siganakalazi takes him over to his judge, speaks with the judge, and makes sure that he doesn't get put in jail. And then she fails to mention all of these things that I said. Now, where it gets tricky is the defense was given a lot of information about the cooperation between the prosecutors and Avito. So it's tricky about whether or not it's quote unquote exculpatory. And one thing people should keep in mind, whether or not something is exculpatory is whether or not a judge decides it's exculpatory. In 2018, his conviction was overturned. An appeals court decided that was exculpatory. She did withhold it, overturns the conviction. This thing comes back to his no longer trial judge, because the trial judge had retired, a judge named Danny Chun, and he was asked for bail. And Chun, in complete chutzpah, references the conviction, said, but a jury of his peers found him guilty. Keep in mind, that's no longer relevant, won't give him
Right.
bond. He's still sitting in jail. In 2019, that overturn gets overturned. So they reinstate the conviction. What this appeals court says is, well, yeah, she withheld the evidence, and yeah, it would have made it look like there was more cooperation, but big deal. Who cares? Why do I bring up Chun? In 2015, the same John Avito said, yeah, I lied. Yeah, I did it because Anna Signicolazzi gave me a deal. He said it in the courtroom of Danny Chun, and Danny Chun said, I don't believe you. And the way the law works is if you recant after the fact and the judge doesn't believe you, you may as well have not recanted. So yeah, 5 people have now recanted through affidavits, or as Avito did in court. It means nothing because Danny Chun doesn't believe him. Why did I mention Danny Chun? The chief judge in Brooklyn, this I got from Doreen Giuliano, John's mother, is Matthew Demick. His daughter dated Mark Fisher in college. Matthew Demick is the one who appoints judges. He's the one who put Danny Chun on this case. I'm sure it's just quite coincidental again.
And we see this all the time, not only in court. Or another way they hide stuff like Brady material is they'll document dump, and they'll end up giving 100 volumes of emails, and they'll just stick it all in there, hoping that as they go, that they don't have time to go through all the documentation. And so if it ever comes up, they go, oh no, we gave that information to them on page X of YZZ or whatever. And what do we do is the question. See, we're surrounded with this corruption in family court, the darkness of the court. We have celebrity prosecutors that sit there and brag how they have a flawless record, where evidence seems to suggest that comes from fraud and withholding evidence, not actually doing a job. What are some solutions, or what should we be doing as Americans to try to put an end to this epidemic of judicial corruption, of family court corruption, and holding these individuals more accountable?
Well, as far as Brady, one suggestion is if you withhold Brady material, you should do the sentence that the person's sentenced for. She should be doing 25
It should be a
to life.
crime.
Right, it should be a crime. Here's the really sick thing. They usually don't even get fired. They don't get disbarred, nothing. You know what happens? The case is overturned, which would have happened anyway because you withheld Brady. But hold on, there's a second Brady violation. But here's how sick it is. So let me give the second Brady violation, and then I'll tell you how sick it is.
Sure.
This woman interviewed, and I know she did because I listened to the recording. The first thing she says is, my name is Anna Signicolazzi. She interviewed another jailhouse informant who happened to talk with both John Juca and Antonio Russo, which would have never happened by accident. Somebody made sure he could talk to both of them. And he said Russo admitted to him that he committed the crime on his own. He wanted to rob him. It was a robbery gone bad. And after the fact, he went back to John. John and Antonio were friends and offered the gun. And John said, I don't know what you got yourself into, but it's your problem. He basically exonerated John Juca, and she withheld that. His current attorney, Mark Betterow, walked into the Brooklyn DA's office and essentially bullied one of the staffers by saying, I know there's more, I want it all. And she grabbed all of these files, put it all in there. And that was one of the things in there. This is 2018. That other appeal I was telling you about, that Brady violation, was ongoing. He asked the judge, let me amend the appeal. They say no. They overturn the conviction knowing full well that this is coming. And so now the second Brady violation is now being appealed, but who's going to see it? Danny Chun first. So after he says it's no big deal that you withheld that a jailhouse informant basically contradicted your whole entire case. And incidentally, two things that are quite convenient. One, Joseph Ingram is now dead. Two, Joseph Ingram was James Ingram, supposedly by a mistake, on the witness list. So the defense never found him because they were looking for James Ingram. They didn't
Which
know
they
who
can
James.
just claim, oh, that was a typo. We're so sorry.
That's
We had
oh no,
hundreds of
not that
thousands of
just.
pages
That's
of
exactly what
documents.
they're claiming. That's exactly what they're claiming. Isn't it remarkable how many little things? And I want everyone to understand this was no small case. They called him the Grid Kid Killer. She's 35-0. This is the number one. This is like beating Alabama for her. This is the one that got her everything, including her current show. This is no small deal. So why did I bring up Antonio Russo? He was one of like 8 or 9 people at this party. He was the only black guy. This is Doreen Giuliano's belief. There was an election coming up for the district attorney whose name was Charles Hines. She believes that there was no way he could win the election. There's a pretty significant African-American population in Brooklyn. If you convict in this high-profile case the one black guy. So he needed to serve a white guy. And there were other white people, however, they had political connections. So they served up John Juca. They brought in their star prosecutor, and they did everything they could to make sure he was convicted. And here he sits in 2019, 14 years later, about the only people who think he's guilty are the prosecutors and the judges. And guess what? They're the only ones who matter.
And they don't really think he's guilty. They don't care. And that's the
Right.
thing. We've given these people this power without accountability, with assumptions that they're going to act according to the law and the Constitution. Like when people complain to me about not being able to find an appropriate attorney in the family law circuit when they have a really obvious case of abuse. And it's really, really simple. These attorneys know how corrupt the system is. When they falsely arrested my wife and then those charges were later dismissed, her attorney that was lying to her when we went to fight these charges, she was trying to get her to take a plea bargain. And she said, look, Mr. Schwab, I have 230 something clients right now. And I was like, you just admitted to me that you're not capable of really managing these cases. And they all know it. They all know they're not doing their best job. They all know that unless they're like her, really high profile attorneys that can be really selective, they're all making deals. They're all forgetting to do things where if one attorney starts going after them all, they're going to go after them. I mean, look at
Correct.
Connie. They've
What that
tried to
attorney
disbar her
told you,
9 times. And
right?
so
Mhm,
it's something has to change. And what's really going to bring about this change is more citizen engagement in this process and understanding that we have given these people a public trust. We have
mhm,
given them the power and authority to prosecute, to investigate, to judge and sentence. And we need to hold them accountable to that public trust, even if
mhm,
that means criminal charges or
mhm.
civil liabilities. Right now, they don't have any of that.
Correct. This lady was rewarded with a nice fat 6-figure salary, I'm assuming what she makes now, in a big high profile show, and everybody thinks she's great. You're right. They rarely get fired. They certainly don't have their license disbarred, and they're never charged criminally. One more thing that people should understand. There are 2 names that are very important to this Juca case. Charles Hines, that was the district attorney. He's had 22 convictions overturned. He's now dead during his tenure. She was there almost the entire time. Louis Scarcella, he was a corrupt cop. They're looking at 70. Brooklyn is. That's just Brooklyn. No idea how many cases he jacked up. 70 in Brooklyn. I think the reason that they're so gung-ho to keep John Juca in jail is Hines is strike 1, Scarcella is strike 2, she's strike 3. That's 1 too many. If she's got 35 cases and they're all jacked up, and let me give you one other case, they're going to spend all their time reviewing her old cases. They won't be able to prosecute new people. The other thing is, between all of this corruption, it's so easy to defeat the Brooklyn DA. How do you try? Every defense attorney will say, How do you trust this Brooklyn DA? Don't you know about Louis
Right.
Scarcella? Don't you know about Charles Hines? Don't you know about Anasika Nicolazzi? Another case, Jermaine Cox. It's being handled by an attorney named Justin Bonus. Here's what he told me. Cox was convicted almost entirely based on eyewitness testimony. Those eyewitnesses, both of them, were first given photo lineups where Cox was in the lineup, and they didn't identify Cox. Then they put Cox in a regular lineup, and suddenly they do identify Cox. Not only did they taint the lineup, but again, and I'm sure she just forgot, it slipped her mind, she forgot to tell them, the defense that is, that first there was a photo lineup. So the defense thought it was a perfectly legitimate lineup. Not only did they taint the lineup, but she lied about the lineup being tainted. That's just
Right,
one other.
because they already saw him in a picture, and then now they probably put all these other people that weren't in any of those pictures, and their
Right.
mind connected his picture to the man standing. Oh yeah,
Right.
that's the guy. I've seen that guy before.
Right.
That's
Right.
yeah, it's totally
Right.
corrupt.
No,
Totally corrupt.
you can't do that. So of course, it's completely tainted lineup. Number one, the lineup is tainted. Number two, you withheld that the lineup is tainted. So look, when you cheat in baseball, you have Barry Bonds with a tainted home run record, and everybody's up in
Right.
arms and they're shocked. When you cheat as a prosecutor, you put innocent men and women in jail for years.
You destroy
and
lives.
you destroy lives. If we're this upset because Barry Bonds is ahead of Hank Aaron, hopefully you'll be even more upset. Now, can I give you some other famous examples of Brady violations?
Sure.
Okay. First one, you've heard of Steve Avery, Making of a Murderer? His attorney,
Yep.
Kathleen Zellner. Kathleen Zellner, if you're not familiar with who she is, one of the very best attorneys in the country. Now, I'm not buying her argument, though, but she is saying there's a disc that was withheld from the defense that has documentation on it. I'm buying that. The problem is what the prosecution is saying is all of the evidence on this disc is in other places, and we handed all of that to you. They're basically saying it's not exculpatory. We're not supposed to make it neat and nice for you. So she's arguing that, and I should mention she keeps losing in that case, but she has had 20 overturned. Michael Flynn, General Flynn, his attorney, Sidney Powell, also, she hasn't filed it yet, but she's about to file. She's claiming that before they made the plea deal, there was a lot of documentation they didn't give, including a document which exonerated him, Flynn, that is, of being a Russian asset.
Which they're still waiting on, correct?
Correct. But
To
my
receive that information.
Right, but my problem is he's charged with lying, not being a Russian asset. I'm really concerned that she's using Flynn to try the DOJ, and that's not your duty is to your client. Flynn lied. I don't think there's any question that he lied, and going after DOJ isn't going to change whether or not he lied. But look, they're both much better. I'm not a lawyer. They're
It's
both
still,
great lawyers.
yeah, but if you look at it, it's still, there's also a legal doctrine called, what's it called? About the tainted fruit. You know what I'm talking about?
Right,
Fruit of
right.
I can't think of it, but basically the whole progression of events were based on something fraudulent, which even though if he did do that, it's irrelevant because he never would have been put in that circumstance if these other, the fruit of the poisonous tree.
That may be
That's
what
what I
she's
was
going to
thinking of.
argue. That's maybe what she's going to argue. But in those two famous cases, you have Brady violations. Neshemia Weberman, not as famous, but you go look it up. That's a Hines case, Brooklyn DA. Let me give you the background. Citizens of Brooklyn were quite upset because there was a perceived, maybe real, but certainly perceived epidemic of sexual assault in the Orthodox Jewish community. Neshemia Weberman was served up, supposedly raped a girl, underage. Her name's never been released. The prosecution withheld therapy notes in which she said that she wanted to get him. Why did she want to get him? She was having sex with her boyfriend, which in the Orthodox Jewish community is, to you and me, big deal. You had sex with your boyfriend, nobody's going to care. It's a really big deal to have sex before marriage in the Orthodox Jewish community. Weberman, according to the notes, told her father she got into trouble. In other words, she had a reason to lie. They withheld those notes. He's sitting in jail for 100 years. The Rucky case, I'm going to look this up. There were two things I found the Brady violations. First of all, the two girls run. They're found in November of 2015. This is from the police report. The girls' names are Samantha and Gianna. Samantha and Gianna came down and immediately told us, referring to the police, that they would not go back to their father. Now, can you imagine putting that in front of Gianna and saying, what do you mean you would not go back to your father? Well, we'll only have to imagine because they didn't give her this police report. Secondly, I recently got therapy notes. You didn't mishear that. I got therapy notes. I'm not supposed to have these notes. One of the star witnesses was the oldest son, Nico, who claims his father's never been violent. He's a great guy. Let me read you from the therapist notes. Samantha, and these are from 2013, right before they ran. Samantha was quite vocal and quite emotional, stating that her brother did not remember all the abuse and anger that they had witnessed in the home, and that she was suggesting that he was being in some way balked by their father because now he was going to get a car and their mother did not have a car. Nico, who runs around TV, goes and testifies under oath that he's never seen his father be violent. Everyone should know that started the moment his father bought him a car. Nico, Child Protective Services' father, stuck a gun to his head. Since his father bought him a car, his father's a great guy. Can you imagine putting those therapist notes in front of Nico and having him read it? I don't care how great and eloquent his answer is. That plants doubt no matter what in the jury's head. But again, they were withheld, so they never got a chance to ask him that. So he could go say that his father's never been violent and not be questioned because those notes weren't released.
And that, to take it down away from the celebrity realm, and I have seen this time after time after time, case after case, that when it comes to DCF, they don't even, because it's civil and you're not being criminally charged, there are no Brady material in the same sense. Correct. It falls under a whole different spectrum of court proceeding, and they are constantly presenting information in the worst light possible, withholding things that are beneficial to the parent or to the relationship between the parent and child. They're constantly twisting evidence to create bias against parents and families. So imagine if they're doing this on such a level where there's a lot of money involved. Imagine to a parent that's a single mom that doesn't have any support, that has a public defender with 236 other clients that don't have time for her stuff. Just, you need to do what DCF says and stop bothering me. Mm-hmm. Because I've come to realize and recognize, doing my own litigation against the state and federal court with so many defendants, which I probably wouldn't do again this way, but this is the way I initiated it. I recognized how much legal work is required for just one case. Right. You imagine an attorney that has 200 cases. There is no way. I don't care how good of an attorney you are. There is no way you can adequately and properly investigate, vet, get documents, go through document on a public defender salary. You don't have the time, you don't have the investigative power, and it's a real challenge. And then you get into the civil realm where they're stealing kids, and these parents don't stand a chance. They just don't stand a chance. And like in Kansas, where our case originated, they actually pull attorneys from a pool. They have a pool of attorneys that specifically do these cases. Before our hearings, one time I noticed neither of our attorneys, by the time I was an attorney, or first I was representing myself, then we had 3 attorneys, 2 that came on from out of state. And I walk in and there's a window open and I see everybody in this room prior to court. All the caseworkers, the therapists that weren't in our favor, the DA, everybody. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on right there? Oh, they're having a meeting. Wait a minute, what do you mean? So they're all coordinating in a room without my attorney. And I was like, why aren't you in there? Oh, they won't let me in there. Why isn't this being brought up in the court? And they're constantly, they claim they don't do it. But like you said, the DA will go over to the judge and say, hey, judge, I need a favor. And they all keep it under the hush hush. And somewhere we have to be able to expose this, if through like things like your journalism, through shows like this, through families that have nothing left to lose and they're willing to fight and go to jail and fight from jail. But somewhere we got to start turning this around. And we're starting to run a little low on time. Let's end here with solutions. Okay, what
The
can
solution to
we do?
CPS, the solution to CPS is simple but not easy. It's unnecessary, it's unconstitutional, it's illegal. It needs to be abolished. But before that solution, the first solution is um, how many people think that if you had your kids taken, you had your kids taken, right? How were you before you had your kids taken? If you wait, foster care's got your, oh, you must be a horrible parent because they only take horrible kids from horrible, right? That's that's probably what you thought back in like 2010. Am I right?
Well, actually, we had people that initiated this trying to attack my family for years. So I understood that they were bad because they had showed up at our houses a couple times on false allegations. But we'd sat down with them. They looked at our house, talked to our kids. Everything was fine. You know what I mean? Our kids were never stolen. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we thought, yeah, they're bad. They're
Yeah.
intrusive. We don't trust them. But
Okay.
never the extent of what we saw once they actually physically had our kids. Like I can honestly say that I once believed before 2015 that you can get justice in the courtrooms of America, that law enforcement, federal government, that they actually followed guidelines, the Constitution, standards of ethics, oaths of office. I don't believe
Mm-hmm.
that anymore. I really think it's an out of control system where once you're caught up,
Mm-hmm.
you're in
But you
trouble.
were caught up. You were caught up. The point I was making, you were a minority, but far less than it used to be. But most people think if you had your kids taken, they're
You're a
in
bad
foster
person.
care, you're a bad parent. So the first thing you have to, there has to be a change in perception because that's just a perception. That's not true. I believe 50 to 90% of kids in foster care have absolutely no business being in foster care, should be with their parents. And even if they should be, they probably still have a better chance with their parents. Second of all, here's what I found. Take this for what you will. People are much more interested and shocked by this federal funds and how they incentivize the Title 4E than the pain you felt. So if you want to fix this, make sure people understand your federal funds are going to take kids and steal them. Don't tell them about your parents or your pain because they don't really care. But they really do care about these federal funds. But once people understand the problem, fixing it is simple. We didn't have foster care in the 1800s. In 1963, there were 5,000 roughly kids in foster care. There's now almost 500,000. That's entirely due to the federal funds. We don't need CPS. We don't need foster care. Somehow the Republic survived from the 1700s all the way to the 1950s, and we blossomed without the government coming in and taking kids. Simple, but it's not easy. But first, cut down the perception that if you have your kids taken, you must be a bad parent. Explain the federal funding, and the answer is very simple. Get rid of CPS. As far as prosecutorial misconduct, yes, I think that a prosecutor like her should do the jail time that she convicted the guy of if she's cheat or he is cheating. Now, there's got to you have to write the laws the right way because you can't be putting prosecutors in jail because some file was on the bottom of a desk and they didn't realize it. You got to be able to
Right.
prove that. Look, this audio recording, it's cut and dry. She's on the audio recording saying, "My name is Anna Nicolazzi." Obviously, she interviewed the guy. Obviously, she understood the consequences of what he said, and obviously, she withheld it. In a
And
situation like,
here's another problem I have with that, Michael, is that I'm suing under USC 1983 deprivation of civil liberties under the color of law. That is a
mhm,
criminally chargeable offense.
mhm,
Part of the problem I've recognized through this journey is that if the people tasked with holding the other people accountable don't do their job or they're corrupted and working together,
mhm,
you have no recourse except
right,
to expose, get out, and get public. The FBI could arrest this prosecutor for public corruption. There's a
right,
number of charges that they could go after her for. And
mhm,
people need to understand it's not just a prosecution issue, it's not just a judicial issue. We have corruption on every level that is only going to change when more and more people like journalists are going to come out and tell the real stories. We have more people running for office that are going to put in legislation and other avenues for people, citizen review committees to hold these agencies honestly and truly fiscally accountable. And
Right.
like you said, we got to cut off the siphon of money. And if we cut off the money right now, what they're trying to do, which concerns me, is not only go after parents criminally that are exposing them, but it seems to me like in the state of Kansas, they're actually trying to legally redefine what kinship means
Hmm.
so that non-blood related people can get kinship money for the family first, which shifts the incentives to family preservation. They want to give these people that have had the kids for like 7 months, all of a sudden you can now be designated as kinship. So they're trying to get around keeping the kids in the family so they can keep their coffers full.
There
It's
are
crazy.
so many federal funding streams. There's fatherhood.gov, which incentivizes things, VAVA, which incentivizes things, Social Security, which incentivizes things in a perverse manner. The other thing you need to do, uh, first of all, I actually, for a 2018 article, I went through the FBI's their press releases for 2 years, and I
Wow.
found it was like 30. I added it up. It was like 30 cops they busted, 27 politicians, 5 judges. You think that's I could go back 20 years and I bet it'll be the same thing. And I told the FBI this. I said, you are afraid of judges just like everybody else. And the numbers prove it. They're all
Well, and
afraid of
because a
judges.
lot of them, a lot of the
Want to be,
judges are politically connected, and that's how they get their position in the first place. Is they're
is
appointed
that,
by some governor or other high level politician that has the ability to get that nomination in. Our judge was directly connected, actually went to China and did business with the governor of Kansas prior to him becoming a governor. Then he becomes governor and he appoints him as a judge, and the guy was a train wreck of a human
right.
being when it came to procedure in the courtroom and the civil rights violations which
There's
occurred. But
so many of them. 2 words that'll explain why judges are powerful. Court order. You got kids, right? Several.
yeah,
You probably give them orders. You think that's as powerful as a court order? I bet your kids don't listen to every order you give them. Go
no, but
try
you
to.
better with the quarter, you're going to end up in
Right.
prison.
Yeah,
Hey,
exactly.
Michael, I really appreciate you coming on this evening. If people want to follow your work or get a hold of you, maybe they got stories, some whistleblower stuff, how do they follow you? And how do they get in touch with you if they have some breaking news or some information about an egregious case?
Sure. So I'm freelance, so I'm in a lot of different places, but I have a blog where all of my articles are linked to. So that's the provocateur.blogspot.com. My email is mvolpe998@gmail.com. I get a lot of requests. Don't take it personally if I don't take your story. It's not that your story is important. It's that when you get 6 a day, you can't do 6 a day. But
Oh,
go reach out to me through my blog on my email anytime. I appreciate you having me on.
yeah, and we're going to continue watching and supporting your work. I'm really excited that we have been seeing more and more independent journalists that actually have a voice and a reputation and the skill to go out there and get published. And it seems this is growing quickly, that a snowball effect is beginning to happen where I'm seeing other news agencies take from your guys' work and begin to do investigations and publish stories. So thank you for paying attention. Thank you for coming on this show. There goes my camera. I got to get my camera fixed. Okay,
Mhm.
and we'll love to have you on again. If any
Anytime.
information about Melissa pops back up, definitely get in touch with us. And we really appreciate your work. Everybody needs
Can I
to
get
support
one last
Michael
thing?
and go get this book,
Right.
Sandra Grazzini Rucky and the World's Last Custody Trial. Get that book. Sounds like an amazing story of corruption.
It is. One last thing. This Deagle case is so important. If they can criminalize her, that's going to be the standard, and they're going to criminalize a lot of people. So we have to fight hard. We have to make sure the trial is fair, because if she's convicted, it's the beginning, not the end. the dam will open, and lots of parents who have their kids taken are then going to be criminalized. The same thing happened in the Rucky case. And I'm finding more, and it happened in Minnesota. There's other new cases in Minnesota doing the same thing. They'll do it in Arizona. They'll go around the country. They won't just take your kids. They'll criminalize you. And if you stop it with her, you stop it cold. Very important
Well,
case.
and let Melissa know that I don't know how to get in touch with her, but if there's any way that we can be of service, help get her any requests or word out for things that she may need. She's going to need some expert witnesses. She's going to need some legal assistance and people to come alongside and help financially. We want to be there, not just to report on what's going on, but the whole purpose of this show originally was to connect people so we can get their story out, get them connected to journalists, attorneys, legislators, whoever's paying attention in order to combat what's happening. And we really want to see her have a victory. Really hope that her children and her get reunited, because another thing, like you mentioned, them dragging this out just keeps her away from her children. They could put a protection order on her and say, well, we're going to have them testify, which people take, and these trolls are taking, saying, oh, see, her daughters are going to testify. That means they're against her. Just because they're on a witness list does not mean they're against their mother, and doesn't mean they're going to be even a witness for the state. And who knows what's happened to these kids since they've been in the care of these criminals. They gaslight children. DCF truly is the Munchausen by proxy author. How many kids do they misdiagnose and get federal incentives for overdrugging and all that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So
Totally
let's give
Totally
Melissa the benefit of the doubt and a novel idea. Let me give everybody a novel idea. How about let's assume she's innocent. Let's have a presumption of innocence on Melissa. Can we do that? Because that's constitutional as well, people. She needs our help. And thank you again for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Join us again next Sunday, where we're going to have Connie regularly with Title IV funding and how these criminals are stealing kids out of your Social Security.